Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird, Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Episode 266, MOMO, tracking down the Missouri Monster with Seth Breedlove. Love talking about cryptids with you, Wendy.
Yeah, it's one of our favorite things.
Absolutely. And so we know that we met a lot of other people that love cryptozoology this weekend, did we not?
Oh my gosh, so many people. Yes. What a fun time up in Menominee, Wisconsin.
Yes, the Menominee, the little-known treasure that lies between Eau Claire, Wisconsin, the home of Bon Iver, and Minneapolis, Wisconsin, the former home of Prince. Oh, Minneapolis, Minnesota, I'm sorry.
And I have to say, I did fall in love with that theater that it was held in.
Yes, the Mabel Tainter.
The Mabel Tainter Theater. It was built in honor of a young lady that died at a very, unfortunately, young age. And her family, I guess she was really into the arts. And so that was their tribute to her as they built this theater. And I have to say, what an incredible tribute, because here we are, over 100 years later, enjoying that beautiful space.
It is. It seats about a couple hundred people, and it's just a perfect little theater the way it looks, and it's beautiful. Interestingly enough, when I was reading about Mabel Tainter, there's a couple of UW Stout professors who released a book on the history of Menominee not too long ago, and now Andrew Tainter, Mabel's father, became like a lumber baron. So he would get really wealthy in 19th century.
That was the place for it up there in Wisconsin.
That's right. And he became really wealthy. And after he left his first wife, he had 5 children with his first wife. And then he got custody of the children and then had a new wife and had 5 more kids. New wife, Bertha.
Wow.
And Mabel was one of those kids. But also, in the history that they were talking about, they said that there was rumors that Mabel had fallen in love with a lowly lumberjack that worked for her father, and he got her pregnant.
What?
And Bertha and Andrew Tainter forced Mabel to get a 19th century abortion, and it was botched. That's how she died, and then they built.
My gosh!
They built the theater because they felt guilty.
Whoa, that's really, really scandalous.
I was gonna say that's some dark history. Now I don't know if that history's true. It's just on the Wisconsin Wiki that a couple of professors put forward that theory a few years ago.
Okay, so it's a theory. Obviously, we can't prove it, but it's interesting because we looked it up because the theater's beautiful and there's these gorgeous stained glass windows that have Mabel's name and her birth and death dates, as part of the artwork. And so we looked it up to find out, because there was also a piano that she had played, and it said, it alluded to her tragic death. And so I was curious because usually, tragic, well, I guess it's always tragic when it's someone that young.
Yeah.
But, you hear the word tragic and you think of something like really dramatic happening,
right.
Like, I don't know, like a tree falling on her and killing her or something like that. And then what we found was, it said it was some kind of like intestinal disease or something that she died of. So, wow, scandal.
Scandalous and sad, and this beautiful
sad.
This beautiful place then created out of the depths of a parent's guilt. Anyway, that was some dark stuff.
That was really dark.
But that's when I was looking it up because I was wanting to write about it because also there's a bunch of ghost stories, hauntings associated with it, and they had some pretty cool paranormal investigations. You could investigate the theater with Grant from the Ghost Hunters kind of thing, and super cool.
What a conference too! They had Travis Walton.
Yes,
was one of the speakers, the abductee. That was the inspiration for Fire in the Sky. Allison Jorlin, our very own.
That's right.
Gave an amazing presentation about the women in the paranormal scene.
You'll hear more from her in a little bit when she joins us for the conversation with Seth.
And just a good variety of speakers, and we had a lot of fun. We made a lot of friends. If you're a new listener that we met at the conference, hello and welcome.
Yeah, come say hi. So anyway, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that was it's been fun because we had Milwaukee Paracon a couple weeks ago and now this, and it's just, I feel like we're ramping so quickly into October.
Yes, it's coming up.
Exciting month of the year. And I'm going to be doing a couple of ghost tours this weekend in Waukesha, Mike.
Yeah, that's right. So if you are in the southeastern Wisconsin area, you can get the skinny on the ghosts of Waukesha, Wisconsin, Spring City itself.
Yes, October 4th and 5th.
Your celebrity ghost guide.
Celebrity. Yeah, that's debatable. But anyway,
we gotta sell
I'd love to see you on the tour. Right. So the Mapletainer was awesome. We enjoyed everybody we met, and we enjoyed all the presentations. Mm-hmm, it was quite an experience.
I'd say it was a lot of fun. And this next thing we're talking about today with Seth Breedlove, his new movie is a lot of fun as well. And the thing is, his movies always are a lot of fun, but this time they went the extra mile. Now, we've talked to Seth before. We talked to him about his movie about the Beast of Bray Road.
Yes, our favorite.
And we talked about his movie about the terror in the skies and all the gigantic flying birds people have seen in Illinois over the years. And we also talked to his partner, Lyle Blackburn, about the Small Town Monsters series before. So we've been covering Small Town Monsters for the past couple of years here, and we really enjoy their films. And so Seth is going to say STM a bunch in the interview. So that's just shorthand for Small Town Monsters.
And that's a production company, or is that the series?
That's the series that they do.
Okay.
They're like an hour and 15-minute long films about these, these stories that you don't hear a lot about. And so, I had never heard of the Missouri Monster, nicknamed MOMO, before. So that was a fun thing to be able, to watch it. And this particular film is interesting because what he does is they have the documentary parts of it. And that part's we're all used to watching that. But they have a film within a film framing device. So what they do is they recreate the encounters with Momo and do them in a 1970s Z movie style. So it's as you watch, and then Lyle Blackburn acts as a host for it. So it's
cool.
He's playing a horror host introducing this 1970s forgotten horror movie. And that's what makes it a lot of fun. So Momo the Missouri Monster, you get a little bit of the documentary part of it when they're talking to the townspeople and they visit the town where this happened and talk to the people today. And then, they go into this, super cheesy 70s style film of the monster attacking people. And that's where it gets really fun. And so, we're talking to Seth about his different, narrative choices, the way he approaches storytelling. And that's what makes it great. But I had never heard of Momo before, so I got to give everybody a quick primer on who this Missouri Monster is.
Yeah.
So the town that this happened in is Louisiana, Missouri.
Oh. Wait, which one?
No, Louisiana.
I know, I'm being funny.
Listen to you. All right.
Yeah, I'm a comedian.
Yep, you are the Jerry Seinfeld of the paranormal world. So Louisiana, Missouri, population 4,600 people in the early 1970s, and this is on the northeast border of Missouri. Near it's right on the Illinois border. It's a Mississippi River town. So it's it's one of those towns that in the 19th century, there was a lot of different activity there, a lot of different business there, and the town kind of explodes in the 19th century. But as the Mississippi River becomes less of important to the the economy of the nation, things start drying up. So by the 1970s, it's a small town, and you get the summer of 1971. You get two girls, Joan Mills and Mary Ryan. They're driving on Highway 79 north of Louisiana, Missouri. And they stopped to have a picnic. So this sounds like the most wholesome thing in the world. It's a couple of girls in the car.
Lovely.
Stopped to have a picnic. But it's 1971. So they're probably doing drugs. No, I don't know what they're doing. Okay.
Nice.
But the thing is, so Mary Ryan says, we were eating lunch. We both wrinkled up our noses at the same time. And I never smelled anything as bad in my life.
Uh-oh.
I turned around, and this thing was standing there in the thicket. The weeds were pretty high, and I just saw the top part of this creature. It was staring down at us. And then she says, it was half ape and half man. I've been reading up on the abominable snowman since then, and from stories and articles, you get the idea that these things are more like gorillas. This thing was not like that at all. It had hair all over the body as if it was an ape, yet the face was definitely human. It was more like a hairy human. And then Joan Mills adds, then it made a little gurgling sound like someone trying to whistle underwater. So they see this thing, they run into their car, they lock the doors, and then, the Momo starts banging on the hood of their car and tries to open the doors.
Oh, man.
So then Mary's it walked upright on 2 feet and its arms dangled way down. The arms were partially covered with hair, but the hands and the palms were hairless. We had plenty of time to see this. So then, she starts banging on the horn, and it gets scared by the horn. And it goes over to their picnic blanket and then eats her peanut butter sandwich in one bite.
Well, can you blame it? That must have been a darn good sandwich.
Yeah. And then it picks up the other girl's purse, looks at it, drops it back, and runs off into the woods.
Okay.
And that's it. So, they immediately submit a report to the Missouri State Patrol that they'd been attacked by a hairy monster somewhere by Louisiana, Missouri. Uh-huh. And that's the only time anything happens to them. That's the only time anything happens in 1971. 1972, the summer starts. Tuesday, July 11th, you get a couple of kids, Terry Harrison, he's 8 years old, his brother Wally, he's 5 years old. They're playing in the yard that's at the foot of this hill. And as they're playing, they start screaming. Their sister Doris, she hears them. She looks outside. She's in the bathroom, and she looks outside the window when she hears the screams. And she says she sees something standing by the tree, 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me.
Oh, wow.
She said it had blood spatter on it, and that it was carrying a dead dog under its arm.
That's just what you want to see hanging out with your kids.
Right. And its face can't be seen because it's got this massive hair over it. And she said it didn't have a neck.
Huh.
So then, same afternoon, Miss Clarence Lee, who lives half a block away, she hears animal sounds growling, carrying on something terrible. She talks to a farmer not too long after whose dog disappeared. So that's where they think that the dog Momo was holding might have been.
Aww.
And so Terry and Doris and Wally's father, Edgar Harrison, he's like a deacon in the local church. He's got a regular Friday evening prayer meeting at his house. After the prayer meeting, him and a whole bunch of people are standing outside, and then they see 2 fireballs soaring over the hill.
Wow.
And the first one was white, the second one was green, and so they see a UFO kind of thing. And then they start hearing weird noises, and they start hearing growling.
Uh-oh.
Right.
Some serious high strangeness going on.
Right, so they immediately call the police. The police come, they can't find anything. But later that night, Edgar Harrison says that while he was looking around the hill, he came out of an old building where he smelled something so disgusting, a moldy horse smell or a strong garbage smell. And that was the first time he encountered some kind of strange odor from the area that the noises were coming from. Next morning, somebody sees a dark, large object walking, crossing the road. And so what happens is the police chief then decides to get a posse together to go look for it. So they really, this wasn't just these people were crazy. The police took them seriously, formed a posse, and then went out to see what they could find.
Oh, man.
They ended up not finding anything. But this became a media sensation, in the tabloids and everything. And the reports like the News of the Weirds and the AP sends out things. Richard Crowe from the original Chicago Ghost Tour. Richard Crowe, he comes out, writes an article for Fate magazine. He interviews them. He goes, out with Edgar Harrison. They go looking for the beast. Edgar Harrison eventually does a vigil looking for the beast for over 20 days where he camps outside because he's convinced, because his kids saw it, his daughter saw it. And so his entire family seems cursed by this thing. Other people are seeing it. It's a national sensation. But then what happens? Nothing. It kind of by the end of July, it kind of goes away.
Just petered off.
Yeah. But that idea, though, that it's not just people seeing a monster like a cryptid, like some kind of ape man, like Harry and the Hendersons. It's just an ape man that lives in the woods or whatever. but they see the fireballs too. So you're connecting it to UFO sightings. So that comes into, that's right at the beginning of, they have the UFO crash right at the beginning of Momo, the Missouri Monster 2. That's not a spoiler. It's actually a really pretty incredible effect. And we talked to Seth about that too. But Momo, the Missouri Monster, the summers of 1971 and 1972, somebody saw a huge Bigfoot-like creature. Other people have suggested it was like a hippie. Like, that's why he ate the sandwich.
I love that theory.
Like the hippie with all the hair over here. Like a particularly hairy hippie. I mean, somebody at the time suggested it was like a wild American Indian. Throwing out some 1970s casual racism in there too.
Honestly.
Like, oh, well, probably, Bush probably was an Indian. What? So that's what happened with Momo. And then it's, I'd never heard of it. And Seth's actually pretty surprised that we never heard of it. But
yeah,
it's a great story and it's a really fun movie. So let's bring Allison in and talk to Seth about Momo, the Missouri Monster. We're talking with the cryptid filmmaker himself, Seth Breedlove. Seth, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I have to say real quick, I listened to the Chupacabra song, the Sunspot song.
Yes.
And it's fantastic. I didn't have a chance to listen to you guys at Michigan Paracon. Was that the event? I can't remember.
Yeah, we were all together at Michigan Paracon.
Okay, yeah. So I hadn't had a chance to hear it, but I listened to the song yesterday and I was like, oh God, this is fun.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That's trying to write fun paranormal music for everybody, and of course we're working on a song right now based on Momo, the Missouri Monster,
cool.
inspired by your movie, and that'll be at the end of this episode.
Yeah, because I find there's just not enough monster music.
That's correct. We're also joined today by Allison from Milwaukee Ghosts.
Yes, hi everybody.
And we all had a chance to watch Momo this week. And I have to say, this might be, I don't want to say silliest, but it definitely has a tongue-in-cheek element to it. That's a lot of fun.
Cool, yeah. I think at some point during the making of it, Mark Matsky, who co-wrote it, said to me that it was going to be the first STM movie that people would watch and say it was like fun. It's just a fun.
Yeah, it was
movie.
very inventive, the way that you retold the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's satirical and tongue-in-cheek and self-referential and self-deprecating and all the things that that make Jason and Mark and I who we are. I think that's all sort of buried in the writing of the movie. So pretty much from the beginning, this thing was conceived as being what you see on screen, which is probably the first time that's happened with an STM movies. We don't have pre-production. There's no like pre-production meetings or anything like that. There's usually a couple of meetings with Zach and I where we sit down and kind of talk about the look of the movie. But until you get into the interviews, you don't really know how a story is going to play out, because there's a lot of, when it comes to documentary work, there's a lot of changes that happen in the actual filming of the interviews, and those interviews a lot of the time inform the way the story is being told. And I think it did with this one as well, especially like the documentary side of it, obviously. But as far as the structure of the movie and the tone, everything is pretty much as it was written in the original script, especially like for the narrative. There were a few things that were changed just due to logistics in terms of filming. Like there was a scene where the Harrison boys encountered Momo for a second time that took place later in the script, and that acted as the inciting incident for the posse forming. But in a weird way, I'll get to this in a second. I'll finish my thought first. I have this horrible habit of starting one thought and then just abruptly interrupting myself. But there was this scene that the boys were fishing and they encountered Momo, and we actually shot the tail end of that scene where they come back home and their dad's waiting for them, and they have this really emotional dramatic scene where they're all yelling at each other. And that was actually the first scene we shot with the boys and Adam together. But it it ended up the day we were supposed to film the fishing scene. It was pouring down rain, and one of the crew got a tick on their stomach, and there was a lot of panic happening, and all of our equipment was getting soaked, and we ended up not being able to film the scene, and we had every intention of going back and shooting it, but instead it just kind of fell out of the movie, and we ended up finding that the Sutterth garden scene, the sequence where she finds the track, it acted as a good inciting incident as well. And you had that extremely hokey zoom into Edgar's eye that I loved so much. And now I can't remember what the other thought was that I started off on. But
no, that's all right. I wanted to talk about, those things you talk about, the cheesy zooms and stuff. And, I think for the people who haven't had a chance to watch MOMO yet, it's a very different, compared to the last couple of, Small Town Monsters productions, for the production quality is amazing on it. And I know you guys aren't dealing with Hollywood-style budgets here. So, congratulations on all the hard work you put into to make something that looks great.
Cool, thanks.
But, I think the idea where you have bits and pieces of a 1970s B horror movie that's, showing the story of Momo in between the interviews, that's part of it that makes it really fun. And where was your first inspiration for that? Like when you guys were talking about it, like how did you be like, you know what, we want to bring out the B horror 70s style? It's almost, Boggy Creek.
Right. I think we actually had the idea. So originally it was going to be played fairly straightforward on the whole. The narrative elements were going to be what you pretty much see in the final film, but how you got into those and out of those was going to be basically a typical STM doc. And then instead of recreations, you were going to cut into this narrative horror movie, and it was going to be a little more straightforward. Instead, we decided to complicate it as much as we possibly could and create this whole fictionalized TV show, which is sort of when I mentioned satire, I mean, that's basically us sort of poking fun at paranormal TV today, and obviously embracing the sort of campy aspect of cable access shows and late night horror hosts as well. But the idea all sort of came together. So basically, Jason Udis and I sat down and dreamed up the entire narrative film from start to finish, and I remembered where I was going, which sort of fits in here. And basically, we sat down and plotted out this whole narrative horror film, and everything you see as far as the events go within the narrative film are things that were claimed to have happened. So the prayer meeting on the side of the hill and the lights in the sky and the posse forming and going up, we change minute details and add some over-the-top elements, especially toward the end of the posse sequence with the bonehouse scene. But for the most part, a lot of this is based on actual events that were said to have happened. And then we heighten them, which is what they would have done in the 1970s. And then that also gives us the opportunity to set the record straight with the documentary portion of things. But we sat down and we had this whole meeting. We plotted the entire movie, and then we sent it off to Mark Matsky, and Matsky did this script, took the first whack at the script, and wrote all that, and then sent it back. And then Jason and I started tweaking that. And at some point in the interim, we had a meeting at my house that consisted of myself and Jason, Zach, who's our director of photography, Adrian, who was producer, and was also buying all the set decorations and all that stuff, helping find locations to shoot. And Adam, who played Edgar and was also producing on the movie. We had this big meeting, and it was in that meeting we were sort of debating over how to get into and out of the narrative film. And Jason hit upon the idea of having Lyle basically play a late night horror host. And in those initial meetings, Lyle was going to be very over the top. It was going to be more
was he going to dress up? Was he going to be the evil cowboy or whatever?
Honestly, it was. And we wanted him to play Count Lyle from Ghoultown, and he would not do it. And I still think that could have worked well. I still think
right, his persona from his band.
Yeah. I still thought that could have worked really well, but Lyle wasn't going for it. So in the end, he's basically doing his riff on Leonard Nimoy or something like that instead.
Sure.
But yeah, that was the meeting, and that was also the meeting where I was like, well, this is either going to be a cluster or it's going to be truly original, which is, like this is the 9th movie we've made. We've also made 2 miniseries. So at this point, just finding new ways to tell stories is becoming increasingly important to me anyway. And so when we hit upon this, I was like, you know what, like I'm totally down for a challenge and trying to make this work and having a totally different tone from something like Terror in the Skies that just came out, 3 months ago, or On the Trail of Bigfoot. And mentioning those two, one of the critiques I'm seeing thrown at the movie is that it isn't like other small town monsters, and it's too tongue in cheek and all that kind of stuff. And to me, it's like, if you're following STM, you've got those things already. You've already got like the straight deadpan documentaries, and there's going to be more. Like we're going to do more of that. But occasionally we want to do something different, and especially if it's going to be the best possible way to tell the story we're telling. And I think in the end we ended up with a storytelling technique that does tell this particular story in the best possible way. And it's probably currently my favorite STM movie. I just as a film fan, I was so excited to find a new way to tell a story, and I've said this too. This isn't necessarily a movie for like the camo wearing Bigfoot crowd. I think if anything, and that's not to say those people couldn't find something here to enjoy, but
right.
I think it's as much a movie for people who love movies as it is a movie for like people who love the paranormal or Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I just thought the storytelling, reinventing the story was just novel. And I think, now with my experience trying to hunt monsters and finding, that there's so much to it that you don't know if it's been influenced by movies prior, totally. Or, if you're falling into tropes when people are falling into tropes when they're retelling right. what they experienced, or the people who are taking those accounts and then putting them on their blogs are retelling it in a certain way. But I felt it was interesting from that aspect that you're trying to be metacognitive and look at things in different ways to get closer to the truth. I mean, what was the reason that you picked MOMO in particular to be your example in that way? Why was that the monster? And maybe tell us a little bit about the background of the monster too.
Yeah. So MOMO was one I had wanted to tell this story since Minerva, going literally since the first STM movie. This was the one that kept talking about doing, and the story has a ton in common with the Minerva monster story. It's about kids in the 1970s seeing a monster on the hill behind their house. It's doing damage to family pets, and the town reacts by sort of ridiculing this family to a ridiculous degree, and the town itself does very little to embrace its local monster legend. And there's a ton of similarities just between the two stories beyond that as well. But this was the story I had always wanted to tell, and I think part of the reason to me is that just the monster itself immediately puts you in the mindset of the 1970s. It's that like 1970s shaggy, hairy monster look that sort of only popped up during that time period. And again, Minerva, there's similarities between the two. What's also interesting about those two movies, and in a way, there would have been something fitting about Small Town Monsters ending with MOMO, because it was a 9-film trajectory from Minerva to MOMO. And in that time, the storytelling changed so drastically that we went from Minerva, which was no recreations, nothing of any kind that you could even sort of point to as being recreations, pretty much just straight interviews, a little bit of B-roll, to MOMO, which is half the film is a recreation. And it's commenting on a lot of the stuff that I found irritating about retellings of these stories. It just doesn't overtly try to push any sort of message, but there's plenty of subtext sort of buried in there.
So you're not trying to be pedantic about it. You're trying to get at it in a fun way, but still a way that's illuminating.
Exactly. There's statements in the movie towards the end that Lyle makes that I totally don't agree with, and I wrote them, and I've said this before. Like as a storyteller, it's not really my point of view that I try to get into these movies. Like personally, I don't think just retelling a monster story or a local legend or a paranormal event in any way you see fit is a good way to preserve that story. Like I'm not really down with that thinking, despite the fact that that's basically what Lyle's line is at the end about how, these movies are doing their own part to preserve the story. Like I really do think there should be striving for truth when it comes to this stuff, but there's also no getting away from it. And I just saw with MOMO and the fact that it's kind of become a forgotten story.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it before. Like I saw that you were making a movie about it.
See, that's crazy to me. I don't know why, but I was always aware of MOMO and Minerva Monster, and I don't live in Missouri. But I had always heard of MOMO, but you're indicative of the response I heard from most people. Like they'd never heard of MOMO, especially younger people. They've never heard of MOMO outside of the meme,
And it's interesting too because Richard Crowe is the guy that wrote the Fate magazine story about MOMO, and Richard Crowe is someone that Allison and I grew up listening to on WGN all the time.
Wow, I had no idea that he wrote about MOMO.
Yeah, and he was someone that we had followed, and we even made a special pilgrimage to go on his ghost tour before he died and stuff like that. And so, as Richard Crowe's super fans, I can't believe we missed it.
Right, and after he died, I did make a pilgrimage to go to his grave. So
I would have to check into this because I can't remember if it's Richard Crowe. I think it was. I think it was Richard that was actually in Louisiana shortly after the initial case who found the abandoned building that we sort of based the Bone House sequence on at the end of the film, because that also was a real thing. Like they found this abandoned building and it seemed like something had been living in the building. So when we were dreaming up the end of the movie, I was like, there should be like human bones all over the ground and like that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, just to get back to your question, I just felt that because of the 70s tie-in and the ideas we had been kicking around the idea of doing something that was much more narrative based for a while, but still in the documentary realm. This just seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to do that and to be able to play around with narrative storytelling devices, but also say something like, man, like my favorite reviews for this movie so far have been the ones where like the writers are getting it, like the underlying messages of the movie, and especially like Mark Matsky's talked about it in some of the talks we've had about MOMO, and he's much more eloquent and has a better as I'm about to make obvious, a better way of speaking about this stuff, and he's talked about like how it is very much a movie about storytelling and how reality is sort of altered in the retelling, especially when it comes to film. And I just don't know. That's what I mean. Like, I don't know that a lot of people are going to get that on an initial viewing. I'm also seeing a lot of people, a lot of the negative reviews that we've received are clearly from people who just didn't pay attention to the movie. And we've had a few where it was like painfully obvious. You want to respond, put your phone down for like 5 minutes and watch the movie, because everything you're stating as an issue that you had is explained like very clearly. One thing I keep seeing is like, why didn't they factually retell the events instead of like heightening the everything that happened? And like it's said throughout the movie, this is the way they would have done it in the 70s, and it's also making a statement about how real events are altered in the retelling. And it's also just like a lot of this is real. Like as crazy as some of this stuff might seem, a lot of this is a pretty straight ahead retelling. The posse sequence at the end is a really good example. We took bits and pieces of all sorts of different encounters that had happened in the woods and put those in the ending. So when you get the scene where like Cliff and Bobo come running up the hill and they come into the opening and there's all these lights floating in the woods, that happened. That didn't happen to the posse, but it had happened to people that had been out in the woods looking for MOMO. They had seen strange lights floating in the woods like this. They heard there were multiple times where people heard a voice telling them to stay out of my woods. There was an encounter where two men that were involved in one of the posses were back at the Harrison house having coffee outside, and a voice said, "I want some coffee." And I mean, like, if we had put that in the movie, it would have been so ridiculous. People would have immediately assumed that was something we just invented, but that was like a part of the actual MOMO lore. Like that was.
Well, people would have thought that was part of like a comedy aspect of it or whatever. They're like, is the monster asking for coffee?
Yeah, but that's something that was claimed to have happened. So I like the way I guess just as a film fan, like if I was watching this from the outside, I think this speaks to a lot of what I enjoy in film, and I think a lot of the success of what you see in the final thing really comes down to Mark and Jason, and the writing that went on, and just how well they sort of nailed that 70s film aspect. We talked to so many people at the Mothman Festival who had just seen the movie that were convinced that was an actual 70s movie that they had just
oh my gosh, really?
Movie.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, well, this one kid I talked to, he thought what we had done is found the 70s movie and then fixed parts of it, like sort of like the effects. He was like the UFO effects were clearly modern day, but it seemed like everything else, especially the posse sequence, was actually from a 70s movie, which is funny because I think a 70s movie would have done the smart thing, which would have been to film the posse sequence day for night. But I was an idiot and actually drug everyone out into the woods at midnight and we filmed overnight.
My favorite bit of 70s lore in there, though, was it when they talk about Alice Cooper biting the head off a chicken.
Yeah. That's Jason. Jason's like a huge Alice Cooper fan. And when we talked about doing the screenplay, he wanted in. Like, Jason had never written before. It was originally just going to be written by Mark and I. And Jason was like, you have to let me be a part of this because I have some ideas for the opening, especially with the girls talking in the car. So that's all Jason Udis because he's a huge Alice Cooper fan.
Because, my dad told me that. Like, when I was like 12, because that was like the first tape, the first album, tape I ever bought was Alice Cooper Trash. Mm-hmm. And when I bought it, my dad's like, Alice Cooper bit the head off a chicken. Can you believe that? And, he was serious because he taught in a high school, and like that was, somebody told him that probably 16 years earlier.
Yeah.
And so they just having that little element of a real urban legend snuck in there. Spoiler alert, Alice Cooper did not really bite a head off a chicken. And he's probably the most conservative Christian rock star around right now. He goes to Bible study every Wednesday.
Well, and the thing is, too, that was a great, little example of, it's a microcosm of what you're trying to do in the whole movie, which is, kind of get at these urban legend-esque turns that things take, mm-hmm. and then trying to derive some truth out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what's interesting about diving out of the narrative and into the documentary. As far as the documentary side of the movie goes, I don't think there's another STM doc that is this close to what the original concept for Small Town Monsters was to begin with that we've done. It just is so geared around the town itself and the townspeople and how the town views MOMO and the Missouri Monster lore. It is everything I always wanted Small Town Monsters to be, short of like one or two of the Harrison kids being on screen. That would have been the icing on the cake. That would have helped really cement a lot of stuff, I think, as far as like the reality versus the legend for some people. But I still think, like just as a movie, as a documentary, the documentary portions are really successful. And I thought the interviews we got were so insightful, especially from like Snooki Ward, whose dad led the posse up the hill. Like,
yeah,
she was so good, and I had to cut out 3 or 4 times where she broke down in tears.
Yeah, she broke down. I mean, that was really emotional.
Yeah, and it's almost unexpected. There are some like, I mean, I'm the sappy one on the crew, so like that stuff always seeps into our movies. Like that's why Terror in the Skies, I've always said, is like the most Seth Breedlove thing we've done, because there's a lot of like sappiness in that movie. That's just me. But this week,
you're just the Frank Capra of cryptid documentary.
Exactly, that's it. The oh God, that needs to go in my bio.
Use that quote, right?
Yeah.
Mark that. Write it down.
Yeah. The ending of the movie, you know, with the ending on Edgar's headstone. Like there's something powerful too about getting to know these people as sort of semi-fictional characters within the context of the narrative, and then learning about them as they were viewed through the eyes of the townspeople, and then, you know, learning what happened to Edgar and seeing how the fact that his gravestone says loving father is such a poignant way of ending that movie to me, because the narrative is very much like a family drama, and it's you know, wrapped up in this goofy, you know, grindhouse stuff, and the kids can't act, and I mean Amy does a great job, but the boys have a harder time.
But they were cute. I mean, that's you're supposed to do that though.
Well, I thought
70s movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's everything was put the way it was, you know, for a reason. But yeah, the way it ends is such a poignant way of ending the movie, because I really think you come away from it, even not having Edgar in there sort of talking on his own behalf or his children or whatever, you still are learning about him, you know, through the other interviews and through the narrative in a way, and then through that headstone at the end. I just think there's some weirdly emotionally powerful moments in the movie. I just think this is also something. This is a movie that will reward multiple viewings, and I've talked to some people who've watched it like 3 or 4 times, and they keep catching new things, you know, that they didn't notice the first time they went through it, and this is probably the most positive I've ever been in talking about one of our movies. So I hope people don't think this is like ego driven. It's really not. Like this was a huge collaboration as far as like the STM crew goes. So I don't even feel a huge amount of ownership over this movie. It was a team effort, and I really think there's something special. But I said to my wife last night,
except for Lyle, because he wouldn't be Count Lyle.
Right. No, he'll forever be on my bad side because of that. But yeah, I said to my wife last night, like I think the most disappointing thing to me would be not whether or not this movie makes money, because we kind of went into it thinking this might not make any money, because it's a very niche sort of movie, you know, for a very specific audience. But I said the most disappointing thing to me would be if it's sort of not ignored, but if it never finds its audience, because I think there's some really unique storytelling choices that are going on here, and some storytelling techniques that we're using that haven't necessarily been done before. And just as like someone that's into film, I hope that's discovered. I hope that it's a discovered movie. I hope that people find it.
Yeah, and I think that Edgar's story and his family's story is really important to tell. You know, what you were saying before about, you know, getting to know people as like almost a fictional character. Mm-hmm. It's very strange for me when I'm doing research for my writing, my presentations, and, you know, I learn about people that are long dead, mm-hmm. and, you know, these incredible and sometimes horrible things that happen to them. You know, I start to really take it personally. Yes. And sometimes I don't even... I'm like, I want to tell this story, but then I like back away. Nope, can't tell that yet, because I haven't found like an appropriate way, or, right. You know, it's really important to come at things with the right amount of respect. You know, and some of these stories are awesome, but it's like these were real people, and you know, so I'm really, I think understanding what you're trying to say here about, that tombstone and, that he was this family man. Can you tell us a little bit more about Edgar and his family?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that isn't in the movie is that there were 8 kids, not 3. And unfortunately, like there's just some aspects of the family life that we didn't feel entirely comfortable delving into how the Harrisons felt about things or like what their emotional what the case sort of had, what kind of impact it had on them as a family, because we didn't have them there to sort of speak for themselves. So the narrative film is based on all these retellings we've heard over the years. So what you're seeing in the narrative isn't really anything that hadn't already sort of been portrayed in, like Fate magazine or the newspaper articles at the time and things like that. But when it comes to actually trying to put into words on their behalf how they felt, I just didn't. It's kind of like the conversation we had with Tara as far as like Native Americans and how they feel about like the Thunderbird lore and stuff like that. Like there comes a point where I don't feel comfortable proceeding beyond a certain point and speaking on behalf of people. So we contacted them numerous times. I contacted both boys are still alive, Wally and Terry. I contacted them both. In fact, the day we shot Edgar's headstone, Terry, I think it was Terry, was right down the hill. He helps manage that cemetery. But we had contacted numerous people in the family. We've been in contact with Edgar's granddaughter, who she was sort of raised by Edgar. We've been in contact with her since pretty much the movie began filming, and we were able to get a little bit of information from her that was in the movie, but for the most part, like it's just a case that we didn't want to speak on their behalf. So the biggest thing is, I guess, the town, as far as the ridicule factor goes, it seemed like it was worse, or the worst with the younger kids. Townspeople knew Edgar and knew him to be an honest man that you could, rely on. So I don't think there was a lot of ridicule from older people, from adults aimed at the family. But when it came to the kids, I think the kids really got, a lot of ridicule from other kids at school. And they, over time, just erected a wall between them and that story. And or maybe that's the wrong way of putting it. Maybe it's more like they put a wall around that story and themselves in the world. Like they are done talking about it. And, and contacting them, we did, when we were there, I mean, obviously, with Minerva, we started, Small Town Monsters started as being the film production company that gets witnesses, right? Like we always go to the witnesses, and the witnesses are on camera, and we get as many witnesses as we can. And, the Mothman of Point Pleasant has like 11 witness interviews or something. And that's our deal. But, we were in a situation where we didn't have any of the witnesses, and I was so desperate to get someone from the Harrison family in there to speak on their behalf that I actually went to Doris's door. We tracked her down, and I went up to her door to ask her to be in the movie, but her health was so poor at the time that she couldn't do it. I did get to speak to her for a moment, which was kind of surreal, because we had already filmed a lot of the narrative at that point, and we had written the narrative. So I felt like I knew her in some strange way. And you spend so much time researching this stuff that when you meet someone, it's like you said, they're almost fictional characters when you meet these people. And it was that sort of situation. Like the first time I met her, I felt like I was meeting a created character instead of a real person. And so, yeah, as far as I know, the town's reaction to the family was never that they were lying, at least not the adults, but that they had been hoaxed and had fallen for a hoax. Now they are adamant, the family remains adamant that what they saw was not a hoax. They saw some sort of monster on the hill, and that's what they saw. Edgar, it's said in the movie Edgar would fight someone if they sort of insinuated otherwise, that they hadn't seen something.
He knocked their block off.
Yeah, he'd cold clock them, as the kids used to say.
Well, I'm wondering about the town though.
Yeah.
When you guys went there and the attitude, because I think about this. because we talked about the Beast of Bray Road as one of your earlier films, and one of my friends, his father was a Elkhorn police officer who was working at the time of the Bray Road Beast. He's passed away now, but the police officer's wife, she told me one time when Wendy and I, we actually were performing near Elkhorn, and we're like, oh, we're gonna go down to Bray Road, and take some shots and have some fun. And she's like, oh, I think all that's fake, and she's like, that crazy lady always call. And she was talking about Linda Godfrey, and I'm like, of all of the people you would say was a crazy lady, like Linda is so measured and normal and just the facts, ma'am, kind of thing that I just had to have a good laugh. I'm like, oh, if you think Linda's crazy, then you probably think I'm insane.
Yeah.
Right, kind of thing. So that was just, you have the reaction of one of the townspeople, somebody who lives in the area, had that. So what was that kind of reaction in Louisiana, Missouri?
It's man, I had to walk on eggshells here because I always try to portray a town in a positive light because I come from a small town. I know what the uphill battle is like. Mm-hmm. But I can say they are leaving probably the most important part of their history, a piece of their history that could easily do something to at least resuscitate some of the tourism, industry in that town. They're leaving it on the ground, and that's one.
Speaking of, you just came back from Point Pleasant,
yes.
A town that, on the other hand, has embraced.
Right. Yeah, this is the polar opposite. It's like Bizarro World, Point Pleasant. And I've said this before because it's actually there's a lot of similarities. They're both river towns. They both have this monster story. But they don't. It's. I'd hate to generalize and just say they all feel this way, because I know in speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, they wanted to do something they wanted to embrace it. They wanted to have a MOMO festival.
I'd go.
Yeah, and they actually wanted to do a big MOMO screening of the movie. We unfortunately had to sort of put the kibosh on that because of basically, I didn't want to create any problems for the Harrisons. The Harrisons tried to steer clear of this, so I didn't want to all of a sudden the town's, using our movie to sort of bring it back. I just didn't want to create any issues for them. So, but yeah, as far as I could learn, and it's pretty apparent in the movie. Like the older people laugh it off. The town historian essentially thinks it's a very unimportant piece of the puzzle of the history of Louisiana. And, the younger people would love to embrace it, but I also think they're kind of clueless as to what actually happened or any of that. And maybe, like the movie coming out will change that to some extent. But just from being there, this is not anything, this story is not anything that the town really cares all that much about. You can go in there's a couple of restaurants. If I lived there,
that's all I'd care about.
I know.
I'd open up the MOMO Cafe.
It's dying. The town is dying for something like that. It really is. The downtown could really. They have a great little local history museum that we shot a couple of the interviews in, and and Martha Sue Smith, the town historian, she is a very wonderful person. They just don't. They don't get it. They don't get the importance of the story, and they're kind of willing to let it die off. But like you can't. It's so tied into everything that makes that town what it is. I don't know how you can just sort of shrug it off. And that was something, I guess, that was with us the entire time we were there. Is like we were there at a very depressed moment in history for that town. That they had just had some really bad flooding. Half the town was underwater. You can see that in some of the B-roll. And like literally there were giant chunks of the town that were underwater. Like there was a gas station on one side of town that was under like 4 or 5 feet of water. Their town sign, like welcome to Louisiana, was sitting in water.
Oh man.
Like there was just something very depressing. I immediately identified with that town because we've traveled to so many small towns and you see the same kind of thing over and over again, but this was on another scale. And even in talking to the people that live there, they'll tell you like this town's seen better days and we don't know how it's going to survive. And so that was eye-opening. Like from a filmmaking standpoint, when it comes to the doc side of things, this was we had this discussion while we were filming the documentary. This was the most sort of sad we've ever been while we were filming in a location, just because of what the town once was versus what it is today, and the concern that people that live there have for how they're going to keep going.
Yeah, and Missouri in particular, when I've been through there, there's a lot of little depressed towns, even Hannibal, where, Mark Twain, all the Mark Twain stuff that they have going on there. I mean, it still seems just very poor.
Yes.
And, my heart goes out because it's like, there's real people living there.
Yeah.
And you're like, why don't they have more money? They have Mark Twain. I mean,
I think that's something where you talk about the ghosts of the Mississippi River kind of thing. Like it almost seems like, when you go up, talk about Alton, Illinois, and La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Galena, and, even, St. Paul, if St. Paul, Minnesota wasn't the capital of Minnesota, it's the government that creates the jobs, in that town, as opposed to, Minneapolis 5 miles away. That's more of a boom area.
Yeah.
And so you look at all these cities on the Mississippi River, and when the steamboat dried up, you had towns that were built and infrastructure for, thousands of people, but the jobs weren't there.
Yeah, that's what they're addressing. I mean, there's talk about that in the movie too. Martha talks about the coming of the railroad and the river transportation sort of dying, and how it left them in a bad situation. I think the other thing too is like there's nothing in terms of like a highway. There really isn't anything. We had to get to a restaurant that was open past 10 o'clock. We had to drive 25 minutes to Bowling Green. So I think it was Bowling Green. It was some town that was also the name of a town in Kentucky. That's how I thought.
So Louisiana, Bowling Green.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like nice people, but maybe not great with the original town names.
Yeah, they need a little bit of work there. But yeah, as far as the town goes, they just don't. They're not on board with it. Now, it is funny. You could go in the grocery store and people knew who we were. Like they knew why we were in town and they were excited about it. But those were mostly like younger people. The older people, if you talk to anyone, if they noticed you were there for MOMO, they would tell you to your face that there was no such thing. Like you care.
Right. Then that's your opinion right now, pal.
Yeah. And so you get that. You would get that a lot. There was in one of the downtown restaurants, there was a Bigfoot statue, and they called it MOMO. But it was just a Bigfoot statue. But at least they were doing something there to sort of, keep the memory of Momo alive. But that line at the end, Lyle's monologue, the second to last monologue, which is all about, or maybe that is the last monologue, where he talks about the legend living on. I mean, it is a sad thing if a town lets a story like that die just because it has such a huge role in what makes that town what it is today.
Yeah, unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you were saying, though, there are so many parallels between Mothman in Point Pleasant and, MOMO in that, it wasn't just a monster. There was a big UFO element.
Yeah.
And also the introduction of that booming voice in the Momo story, reminded me a lot of the Bell Witch, and maybe we got aliens going on, which is kind of the way you went with the lights, but and those depictions, or maybe it's Fae.
I mean, the way
or poltergeist.
Honestly, I think we kind of pulled in everything. The movie opens with like what is very clearly a UFO crashing to Earth, and sort of hinting at the fact that, and I love that scene, by the way. I don't know if you guys noticed, but those are matte paintings.
Oh wow!
Yeah, like Santino did that as 70s as you could. When that UFO comes down, those are matte paintings with the UFO animation, which I adore. I mean, if you watch that thing on a big screen, it looks amazing. But I think when you get to the voice in the woods and the little lights in the sky, it becomes less UFO like. And what we're sort of hinting at in those scenes is that there were multiple phenomena taking place around that area at the same time. And it, again, like that ties back to Minerva, where you had something similar. You know, like the Caton family claimed that they used to see a woman on horseback behind their house, who would disappear, and there were disappearing caves, and there were lights in the woods and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of like similarities between those two. As far as like you have to have that UFO element involved, because that's what, you know, at that time there was that huge UFO flap, and that flap didn't die off in 73. In fact, it went from like 71 through, I think Michael Huntington told us, like 78 or 79, where there were consistent UFO reports around the area. And it wasn't obviously relegated to just Louisiana, but I think my favorite part about that posse sequence is when they come into the opening, when Cliff and Bobo lead the crew into the opening, and you've got all those lights flying around in the sky. The sound effects there are so bizarre. They almost hint at fairy lore more than like UFOs and aliens.
Well, I like that, you know, it delves into the high strangeness aspect, because the thing is, you see, you know, when you see the ship at the beginning, you kind of like, you forget about that all the way through, because your mind starts just going to straight up the old Bigfoot stories and everything. Mm-hmm. And it's not again until you know, the fireballs in the hill, or, you know, over the hill,
or even like when the big moment at the end starts to happen, you know, when the family's outside the house and the lights in the sky show up. I don't want to spoil what happens there, but I love bookends. Like I've always loved bookends, and that one has a really nice bookending between the UFO coming through the sky during the title sequence, and then how it ends with the family. It's full circle back to where it started.
Well, you know, speaking of full circle, now you mentioned that, you know, you were going to start with Minerva and originally end with Momo in the Small Town Monsters, you know, series of films. And now that you've, you know, done this many films, is there something, maybe a theme through it, or a particular thread that maybe links the cases or links the towns in a way that you didn't realize when you were first looking into it?
You draw a lot of parallels just between the way the towns react and the way the stories play out. I mean, they all have that same pattern of like an inciting incident that brings the media involved, you know, gets the media involved, that leads to the you know, police and monster hunters coming to town and all that kind of stuff. But I don't immediately see parallels between the phenomena themselves. There's just, I think, due to the 1970s cases, a lot of them being so high strangeness oriented, and the fact that so many of our movies involve those 1970s cases, you see a lot of that across all the titles. But yeah, I mean, this wasn't really the question you were asking, but
That's all right.
The thread that I see now, looking back on it, is from pretty much from Boggy Creek Monster through Momo. They're all dealing with story. Like they're all examining the idea of storytelling and legend building as much as they are monster cases. And I mean, sometimes it's very overt, like you know, like Bray Road Beast or the Flatwoods Monster. You know, where the narration is literally talking about, you know, story.
Right.
And sometimes it's a little more subtle. I think weirdly enough, I think MOMO, it's a little more subtle, despite the fact that it should be so obvious. I think some people are missing that that's the overriding theme of the entire movie. But that's something we've been exploring for a long time, and that's probably just me, as like someone who started as a writer and being sort of obsessed with storytelling since I was a kid. That's something I keep coming back to. MOMO is very self-referential, and it's almost examining the importance of or importance or lack of importance of in what we do, like in what Small Town Monsters does and what I do. And I think some of that comes from the fact that, we make we make documentaries about cryptid cases, and I think the quality is outstanding, especially for what we're working with. And again, when I say something like that, that is not self-praise. I'm saying as a crew,
we got some really sweet quality here, guys.
No, I just think the quality's there, but we will never be taken seriously. I won't ever be taken seriously because of the subjects we cover. So, there's moments in the movie, in Lyle's monologues, especially at the beginning and the very end, that are literally about that. So maybe that's like my weird way of working through that, like my masochistic way of...
I was thinking like, I'll never be Errol Morris.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But, I think what you're talking about, though, and especially because I think in the conversations we've had over your past couple of documentaries and have discussed how, in the Bray Road Beast, you used some of the inspiration from Hammer. Here, you're using inspiration of 1970s horror movies, or like the movies they four-walled and took around, like,
right.
The Legend of Boggy Creek and things.
Totally.
And using that as inspiration, but saying that is how we tell these stories, that is how we share these stories, and then examining as well how we share the stories in that horror movies take inspiration a lot of times based on real life cases, or you take a movie like The Conjuring or something where that's half the scares. Beyond it's a well-made film, but the idea that they're selling it as based on a true story, we have a different perspective than coming into the theater. It sets the audience expectation differently and changes the context around it, where all of a sudden you're in the middle of the film going, oh my God, this really happened. Or when you're watching a quote unquote based on a true story film, you bring a different context as a viewer. And I like that's you're examining that in a way with your films.
There's almost less work as a filmmaker when it comes to making movies about these stories, because there's something inherently terrifying about the fact that people believe they've seen something like the Beast of Bray Road. Like that's a real thing that someone believes they've encountered. And I always used to be blown away by the fact that I could talk to people who said that Minerva Monster... I keep talking about Minerva Monster for some reason on the show, but it's the 5-year anniversary, that's why. Okay. I'll talk to people and they'll say that Minerva is the creepiest movie we made, or like they can't watch it at night. And I kind of chuckle at that, because like I watch it and I can't watch it at night or day or morning or evening. I mean, it's because I think it's terrible. And but other people will watch it, and because of the fact that you are solely listening to sort of the original witnesses talk about their sightings and things, that scares people. Like just that reality, the I guess the honesty of that film is what people are responding to. So there's, and there's no recreations in that. That's just people responding to Howie Caton talking about his family seeing this creature on the hill behind their house, and the fact that it ripped their dogs, that broke their dog's neck and stuff like that. So
yeah, well, I think the dogs get it, people. So that was interesting. How that came out in MOMO. That apparently pets were missing, and it's seen on the hill, or in the movie representation of it, and the kids see it, and then it holds up the dead dog, as kind of like, here I am, look what I did. It's so proud of itself. But that's interesting that Minerva Monster was just the rawness of
people talking,
speaking to the witnesses,
yes,
and just straight up. And that's hard for people to deal with because of so much reality.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying too, with like the full circle thing from Minerva to Momo. I don't think I've ever planned on quitting with Momo. I just think if something had happened, if like we went broke and could no longer make Small Town Monsters movies, it would have been the perfect place to end, because you've got, to sit down and watch Minerva to Momo would be really interesting. I would never be able to do it. But that would be a really interesting thing to watch, is the progression from the one to the other.
Well, if people want to check out Momo, number one, you can check the show notes, and you'll see at othersidepodcast.com/266. We'll have a direct link. But if you don't go, if you want to just go right now to where can people watch it right now?
They can watch it on Amazon, Vimeo on demand. It needs to get up on VidiSpace, but I was late in sending it to Elizabeth, so it's not up on VidiSpace yet, and it's available on DVD through smalltownmonsters.com. It is being pitched along with a few other STM movies at on a much larger scale than we've ever done anything before. So there is a hope that some of these movies will be available to a larger audience on a larger scale sometime within the next year and a half. And we're just kind of waiting on word back on that. But there's the hope that these three, or the last four plus the two miniseries, will be available on a much larger scale. And some of our movies are already available on a larger scale, but this would be beyond where anything that we've done is so far. So hopefully that comes together.
So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. Seth, we just want to thank you again for your time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sharing your behind the scenes stories, and always like to have this. We encourage people to watch the movie and then have the discussion afterwards. And this is your special features right here to help out for a discussion after the film. And thank you for all you do. It's really great. Real quick, can you share your next project with us?
Oh yeah, we are actually. I leave this weekend for family vacation. While we're on family vacation in Orlando, we are picking up Shannon LeGros from the airport, and on our way back from family vacation, we will be shooting more stuff for On the Trail of UFOs. And then as soon as we get back to Ohio, I am immediately leaving and doing an East Coast leg of filming for On the Trail of UFOs. It'll be a total of like 11 straight days of filming, which is the longest we've ever done. So On the Trail of UFOs will be the next STM release, and that'll be out in probably April of next year. And that's going to be a very large-scale mini. Oh, good, the clock. That'll be a very large.
We've come full circle.
Yeah, it's just like Minerva to Momo. No, it'll be a very large-scale miniseries about the UFO subject, and that will be followed in September of 2020 by The Mothman Legacy, which will be followed in December by The Mark of the Bell Witch.
Awesome. Ooh. Well, we're looking forward to seeing all that stuff. Good luck on what I think Momo is a really fun documentary, and you guys did a great job. So congratulations once again, and just good luck with the project.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's definitely a great one to check out this month, Mike. The month of October, the month of the weird and strange and fun and spooky.
That's right. We're kicking off for October with some cryptids.
Yeah, so add Momo to your queue this month, everybody.
Yep, you can grab it on Amazon Prime. We have links directly at othersidepodcast.com/266 as well. Now, for the song this week, well, we wanted to pay homage to the 1970s like Seth Breedlove did. Where he's making a early 70s grindhouse-style B-movie, and we wanted to create 1970s hard rock track that we think that maybe, when those girls were driving along and they had their picnic lunch, what kind of music were they listening to? Well, this would be the kind of hard rock song we think they'd be listening to when they, right before their picnic. And so this is us, Sunspot, with our song inspired by the Missouri Monster, Momo.
Tell you it's true. Well, I was down Louisiana, Missouri, when you thought I was stepping out on you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Oh, we got a hangout coming up this week, Mike.
Oh, yeah. October 2nd at 7:30 Central Time. We're going to be hanging out with our Patreon community and talking about MOMO, talking about the conferences, talking about weird haunting experience that have happened to us, and all the kind of fun things that we love discussing with our best friends, the Patreons.
Got to find out what everybody's planning for October. I mean, this is technically our September hangout, but it's early in the month. And so, I think I'm going to have to pick up some candy corn for this one.
Absolutely. Oh, I saw a great meme today. It's like, how do you eat candy corn? And it's like, pick up the candy corn, throw it in the trash.
Oh, boo. Throw it in Wendy's mouth.
All right. That's the thing. And that's the kind of stuff you discover in the hangout. That Wendy now will be the only person you've ever met, even virtually.
Come on. No. It's everywhere.
Yeah, at least she doesn't like circus peanuts, everybody.
Well, somebody's got to keep the candy corn factory in business, and I'm happy to be the one to do that.
That's right. The thing is, everybody needs a friend that likes candy corn, so you can get rid of yours. But we want to talk about all the fun plans everybody has for October. It's Christmas season for weirdos, and we are going full into it this month because we're going to have appearances at 2 more conventions, Imaginarium in Louisville, Kentucky, next weekend.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be at the Chicago Paranormal Convention, October 19th. So it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of paranormal in October. This is the time for it. I mean, Wendy's leading ghost tours, going to paranormal shows, and we're talking to our Patreons. And that's going to be October 2nd. If you're interested in joining us, you can check out our Patreon community at othersidepodcast.com/donate.
And a quick shout out to Dr. Ned. Hope you can join us this week for the Hangout, Dr. Ned. And we thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast at the level where we get to give you a big special shout out every week, which we love doing.
And if you guys haven't signed up for the actual email newsletter yet, you can also check that out at othersidepodcast.com/subscribe. So if you're just listening to this and you're like, well, I don't know if I'm ready for the Patreon, spoiler, you are. But I would like to keep and hang out with Mike and Wendy more. Make sure you check out our newsletter where we have like all the coolest stuff as soon as it comes out. We'll pop it in your inbox, and we promise not to bother you unless it's for money. I mean,
oh, come on.
Oh, we promise not to bother you.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you next week.
Alice Cooper bit the head off a chicken. Can you believe that?